Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our first webinar of the year and spending a part of your workday with us. My name is Susie Ratsavong, and I'm the Communications Director for MindStream Analytics. Today's webinar is Transforming Your Budget Process to Tell Your Story. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. To confirm that you can all hear me, please click on the Raise Your Hand button now. Great. On the right side of your screen, you will see a Questions tab. At any time during the webinar, please enter any questions you might have in that box. We'll address all the questions at the end of the webinar in the order the questions are received. And finally, for your information, this webinar will be recorded. In addition, I'd like to, of course, give you a quick overview about us. MindStream Analytics, headquartered in Boston, is a leading consulting and managed services provider focused on helping companies solve complex data challenges, improve business analytics, and optimize business performance. Our experienced consultants and professionals are here to help you align your business and technology needs with ease. Today, you will have the treat of hearing from Shannon Burket, MindStream's Planning and Analysis Practice Lead. Shannon, take it away.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Susie, for the introduction. My name is Shannon Burket, and I am the practice lead of the planning analysis team at MindStream Analytics. I have been working in the FP&A and EPM space for more than 18 years. I have divided that time between systems implementations and business process transformation. So just to kick things off, today we're going to be discussing budget transformation and how embracing a budget transformation process will enable your organization to better tell its story. We're going to start off with the situational assessment, then discuss the components of what we're going to call your financial playbook, and then some keys to a successful transformation. At the end of the session, we're going to talk about a real-world budget transformation success story. So from a situational assessment perspective, before you start executing what we're going to define here in a few minutes, your financial playbook, you need to look at your situation and identify how you can unlock, business potential through transforming your budget process. So every organization faces unique challenges and pressures that they need to overcome. There are, however, common pressures and expectations that are often plague your organization. And things like that are this increased pressure to anticipate and deliver on your shareholders' expectations while you're still trying to maintain very strong corporate controls. You're trying to deliver more timely and transparent information. And the bottom line is you're trying to improve the performance of your organization. So what we see in a lot of organizations that to deliver upon these objectives, to truly unlock their business potential, they've got to start a journey of budget transformation. And the transformation process needs to include agile budgeting processes. How are we going to be able to quickly react to changes in our business and adapt the budget for that? Centralized controls to ensure accuracy and integrity. Gone are the days where, companies can have disparate environments that don't align to each other, right? We have all the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements that exist for public companies. You also have to have very effective change management, right? One of the big things about transformation is that you're going to be implementing change to your process, change to your tool, maybe change to your organizational structure. And as a company or as an organization, you need to effectively manage that change. And then last but not least, there's got to be accountability. People have to be tagged with delivering the transformation. They need to be empowered to lead the organization through it and ultimately be held accountable for it. So then you step back and you say, okay, what do my processes look like? What do I need to change in order to transform my budget? So if you look at your current state, these are, common examples of things we see with organizations when they start out on a budget transformation process. Is their current state is very reactive. It's decentralized and disparate. So you may have a planning or budgeting tool in place today. You may have processes, but what I mean by decentralized and disparate is that maybe your company or organization is made up of 3 business units. And within those 3 business units, they each have their own set of tools. They each have a different way to manage their tools and processes. Maybe they come together from a consolidations perspective, but you don't have consistency across your business. More often than not, we hear that organizations spend the majority of their time compiling, validating, and verifying information. That if they have a budget process, that 75% of that time is just spent getting the numbers together. And that leads itself to very, very limited analytics and limited reporting, because you've not left yourself any time to add value-added processes into your process because you've spent all your time compiling, validating, and verifying information. We often find that the processes are often very task-driven and are about process monitoring. So there may be a budget calendar that's out there and that's communicated at the beginning of the budget process. And we see that a lot of groups are just focused on, did I deliver that task on time? Have I met that calendar? And reporting up maybe to your consolidation group or your corporate FP&A group, and they're checking off, yep, I got it from this business unit A, I got it from business unit B. So it's a very ineffective place to be, and it leads to things like budgets that aren't very accurate. So organizations want to transform from this state to the future state that becomes more proactive and value added. You start to implement centralized data and standards, right? So by that I mean you could have common chart of accounts. You may align to a standard close calendar or a standard budget calendar. But as an organization, you're trying to centralize the management of things and standardize it out throughout the organization. You get to a place that the data that you're delivering and the tools that you're implementing allow you to do root cause analysis and start to look at predictive analytics. You start putting reporting in the hands of the users. It becomes, less static and more dynamic. And you provide the organization with the ability to do ad hoc capabilities. So gone are the days of just printing out and generating a report book, right? It becomes more about, allowing, interaction with the data. So ultimately what you would do as part of this process is you're going to transform from a very task-driven process to really you create a more insightful business partner. And by that I mean the individual business units have gotten to a place where they're adding value, and that value is allowing them to run their business more effectively and allowing, if you're talking about a consolidations group, being able to consolidate those views and ultimately run the overall business. Oops. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. This is the same kind of slide, but instead of talking more about process, let's talk about tools a little bit. There is some overlap there, but what we hear from a lot of organizations about their current state is that there's a lot of Excel spreadsheets. Some organizations have no, budgeting tools, specific budgeting tools. They do it all in Excel. But we hear that even with the organizations that have budgeting applications, they're heavily reliant on Excel. So maybe they have offline models that they then load into their tool, but you still have a lot of that, stuff hidden in the desk drawer. So you got, lots of Excel, disparate applications, manual data processes. A lot of organizations, it's amazing, are still, keying in, financials that they may use for trending within their budget. There's key information, key business drivers that aren't in the system anywhere, or are not in a readily available system. They have tools that allow for static reporting, right? They manually create a book of reports in Excel or PowerPoint and distribute that within the organization. And because of these things, everything takes a really long time. And because it's less dynamic, right, you often see lots of iterations because you're not sharing that information within the organization until you've done a complete pass. And then once again, I touched on this a few minutes ago, you have more of a distributed management of the process and tools. So then when you get to the future state, what you're striving for is you want to get to a place where you have standardized and purpose-built tools, right? That you're able to automate data processes and have user-controlled mappings, that your reporting becomes dynamic, that you're able to complete the budget process more timely. You have less iterations because you're looking at a more purpose-built tool. And then you start to centralize the management of the system. So this drives value to your user community, and then also as an organization should begin to help lower costs. So now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we're going to call your financial playbook. What is the practical guide you need to drive your organization through budget transformation? So we're going to talk about, starting off, how do you define your vision? As an organization, what are you trying to accomplish? And then setting goals to support that vision. We're going to talk about how talk about methodologies and best practices within the budgeting process. Going out and defining clear requirements for your budget, and then talk about the evaluation and the selection of technology. So the first step is to define your vision. And your vision needs to encompass all of the components of budget transformation. It needs to contain organizational transformation, redesigned business processes, and best-in-class tools. What this means is different for every organization, but the themes are the same. Without changing the business process and the people process and giving them tools to do their job, you're not going to be successful. So some of the things that we commonly see in an organization's vision are things like aligning strategy and execution. By this, I mean you need to improve the line of sight throughout your organization. You need to take what the executives, senior management see as the strategy of the company and drive that down throughout the organization so that the individuals that are responsible for executing clearly understand what that vision is and are aligning their processes to that vision. You need to drive ownership and accountability, empowering your organization to get it done, letting people know you need to drive this, right? And making sure that at the end of the day, you can be successful. Your vision also needs to include things about improving transparency into your budget. Things like one version of the truth. So, common chart of accounts, standards around data elements. So maybe one thing to say, oh, we have these 15 accounts. But you also need to be talking about what those 15 accounts mean and that every organization is leveraging them the same way. Also with transparency, you have to have increased collaboration. You need to allow all the parties within the process to understand the process and their their individual pieces and their relationship to each other. You need to streamline business processes as part of that as well. Is there redundancy that can be removed? Is there consistency that can be applied? And then the bottom line, what I find the most important within, improving your transparency is that you reduce time spent on compiling, validating, and verifying, and it becomes value added. The next thing we commonly see in organization's vision is enhancing performance tracking and reporting. This will lead to improved forecasting, improved accuracy, more timely reporting and analysis, and allows you to link financial and non-financial information. And the last vision item that we commonly see is that you want this process to facilitate better decision making, that you want to turn data into actionable information. So after you've defined your vision, you need to establish some goals. And you need to think about the goals as the tangible benefits you expect to receive from the transformation process. So common goals include things like bridging the gap between strategy and execution, facilitating better decision making, improve ownership and accountability, and maximize business performance. So to talk about those goals in a little more detail, well, you have these goals and then you need to support them with deliverables. And so for each goal, you're going to have defined deliverables that you want to accomplish. Examples of a deliverable might be you want to define a KPI, provide a common view of performance, or have faster budgeting cycles. So as I said, you've established these goals, but they need to be supported by deliverables. So in the examples I gave, where you're going to bridge the gap between strategy and execution, the idea is that with consistent, accurate analysis throughout the organization, everyone will understand the goals, the corporate goals, and align their activities with those goals. So what you're trying to do is you're going to define the KPIs that do that, right? This in turn will help you build a process that's more streamlined that will allow for faster budgeting cycles with fewer iterations. The other thing it should help you do as part of this initiative is the deliverable is you want to be able to identify and track the true sources of savings and profitability. You don't want to just know that my revenue is up. You truly want to understand what's driving that. So as you look to define requirements, which is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, you want to make sure that as part of your initiative, you're able to identify and track your true sources of cost savings and profitability. If we look at facilitate better decision making, if we want to talk about the business world, right, lots of companies, are built through merger and acquisitions, or they have multiple subsidiaries around the world. And over time, you've ended up with, kind of a patchwork of transactional and budgeting systems, right? And there's no single version of the truth. So one of your deliverables here is that you're going to provide a common view of performance. You're going to define a single version of the truth. You want to be able to automate things that have historically been prone to error, right? And eliminate as many manual processes as possible. And then, another deliverable that we commonly see in this area is that you have the ability to proactively alert management to significant variances from expectations. So they're charging you with facilitating better decision making, and you continue to identify the deliverables that you need to achieve that. To improve ownership and accountability, if that's one of your goals, you commonly see that organizations need to involve more people, more employees in the budgeting process to drive that collaboration that we've already talked about. You want to empower employees to set and measure and hit goals, right? They need to know, hey, this was the corporate target. How did it cascade down to me so that I can make sure that I am, keeping up my end of the bargain. And then, as I've mentioned before in other areas, you want to continue to have collaboration. So one of your deliverables is to build a process that enables that. And then the last section, that I could talk about as an example is the ability to maximize financial performance. And you'll have to excuse me WebEx is frozen. There you go. So you want to maximize business performance. And to do that, we've touched on previously, you want to streamline business processes. You want to start thinking about how do you develop driver-based models and deliver to the organization more timely, accurate, and actionable information. So step 3 in this playbook is to start thinking about, budgeting methodologies and best practice. So if you go back, 10 years, well, at least 20, even 20 years, there was always all this talk around what budget methodology should my organization employ. Should it be top-down, bottom-up, driver-based? There was zero-based budgeting. There were all these different methodologies out there. And for a time, organizations were locking in on one, and that was the methodology their organization was going to use for budgeting and even forecasting for that matter. And what we're seeing now is that those days are in the past, and the organizations today are using a combination of multiple methodologies. So if we look at top-down, right, which by its name starts at the top, right? So this is where the budget is normally set by the senior leaders of the organization. And then once they've come up with the budget, they allocate it or push it down throughout the organization. And it's generally, in its true sense, been about budget dollars. Then you can look at bottoms up, right? Bottoms up starts at the bottom, works its way up the organization through an approval process. And it also historically talks about budgeting dollars. And then you get to driver-based budgeting and forecasting. And that's where you start to link your financial and operational drivers to key variables in your business, right? You're focusing on the P's and Q's, not the dollars. And what's interesting about this model is that this methodology is that it could be top-down or bottom-up. You could have a driver-based strategic plan that was only managed at the top, or you can employ driver-based budgeting in a bottoms-up methodology. And then when you start thinking about forecasting and not so much budgeting, which they're somewhat synonymous, is that organizations are starting to get away from budgeting only the current fiscal year. So you commonly see, if my fiscal year is January through December, I'm going to do a budget from January to December, and I'm going to forecast January to December. So if I had a monthly forecasting process, I'd have, a 3 plus 9. So you had 3 months of actuals and 9 months of forecast. And that would move throughout the year, and you'd get to the end of the year, and you would have 11 months of actuals and 1 month of forecast. And that's just not enough time for an organization to react, right? If you know of a key business issue in November, looking at only what you can do in December is not usually sufficient. So what you're seeing now is that organizations are starting to employ a rolling forecast as part of their process. And this is something that can replace budgeting. So one approach is you eliminate budgeting altogether and you move to just a constant rolling forecast. And other approaches are that you continue to have your fiscal budget, your fiscal plan, and then supplement it with a forecasting process that becomes rolling. So, these are very common methodologies that are used today. I think the key is that you're seeing organizations embrace portions of all of them. They're doing a top-down target setting that they cascade down throughout their organization. They're doing bottom-up, driver-based budgeting for the remainder. And then if they also employ some sort of forecasting process, they're starting to embrace the idea of a 12, 15, 18, 24, sometimes even longer, rolling forecast process. Another thing where it comes with best practices in budgeting is what can you do to ensure that your budget becomes more accurate, right? And there was an Oracle issued a white paper a couple of years ago about tools and budget processes, and these are some of the things that they've referenced as, best practices if you really want to make sure that you're employing, if you're striving for budget accuracy. So some of these are repeats of things we've discussed previously, but aligning the strategic plan with the annual budget. You want to shorten the annual budget cycle. The longer people work on things doesn't mean your end result is necessarily better. Again, we're going to reduce the reliance on spreadsheets. We're going to focus on impactful drivers, drivers that if you pull them, you can change the course of your business. You're going to leverage driver-based budgeting. You're going to drive budgeting across your entire enterprise. You're going to complement it with a rolling forecast. It's going to include both operational and financial budgeting. And you begin to link things in like projects and HR components and capital plans. So these are just a few best practices that you should consider if as part of your budget transformation. Now we get to the fun part. Step 4 of the playbook is defining your requirements. So you need to think about requirements as the key link between your vision and the best solution selection for your organization. And to be successful as part of the requirements gathering, you have to identify subject matter experts to participate in your workshops. These need to be people in your organization that understand the process, that they live the process, the current process day in and day out. They also need to be agents of change. They need to be your high-performing employees that want to, spread excitement throughout the organization. They're going to come together, and through a set of workshops, they're going to identify the process gaps and pain points that exist. So this can be as entailed as doing a SIPOC for every single one of your processes. It could be roundtable discussions and process mapping. But what you should come out of that is a very good understanding of what your process is, where your process is lacking, what do you want to address, and a common list of pain points from the SME's perspective. And this may be related to process or tools. You also want to do an evaluation of your technology. So if you have tools today, you want to look at where does it work, where does it not work, right? And what's just painful. Maybe something is very effective and that it does, or it's very accurate, but it's really slow. So you have a pain point around, speed and agility of your technology. And then ultimately you want to ask the users what they want. What do you want from your process, and what do you want from your tools? So that you can come away from those sessions, compile all that information, and have a list, a soup to nuts list of functional requirements. Then you need to bring those SMEs back together and say, here's my list. And when I say you put together a list, I mean this list could be hundreds and hundreds of line items long. This list talks about what type of user experience you want to have, what specifically you want to deliver in your budget, what type of reporting capabilities do you want to employ, how do you want to administer the system. So this list is an all-encompassing list. It can be very long, but then the team needs to come back together and prioritize that list and weight those items for importance. After you've done that, then you'll be able to take those top weighted requirements, which I'm going to call your critical success criteria, that you're going to use to identify solutions that should be evaluated. So from there, you've got this big ball of requirements. You need to start evaluating the technology that you want to move forward with. So without technology, you're going to miss a key component of the budget transformation process. You can put all kinds of process and organizational change in place and impact your organization. There's no doubt about it. But to really reap the benefits, you need to include some sort of technology component. So as you've moved on to this technology evaluation and selection, the first thing to point out is that it's a complex task. This isn't something you sit down and do in 15 minutes, right? You're going to go out and you've got to first put together a list of all the vendors in this space that start to meet your critical success factors. And then you also have to think about, what other things are out there that may not be or are important that weren't captured in those requirements. And these are things like tools that are adaptable and integrated, collaborative, and finance-led. you start to see that as you're transforming your budget, even though you always need support of your IT organization, because you want to have adaptable tools, they need to be tools that finance can adjust in order to meet their changing business requirements. So you're not only evaluating functional requirements, but also some, top-level technical requirements as part of this first pass of technology selection. So then you kind of get into the details, right? You have to identify that list of vendors that meets your critical success factors. And generally that list, it's going to be a handful or so, more than 2 or 3, less than 10, definitely less than 10. And you want to schedule demos with those vendors. You want them to be able to showcase their functionality, right? Again, you're going to bring your SMEs back in. You may even expand that net to include IT, some key leaders within the organization, but you're going to conduct these demos, and then you're going to get feedback from those participants and narrow down the list to I'm going to say the top 2 to 3 vendors. Depending on your organization and the complexity of what you're looking at, maybe you would go more than that, but generally you're looking at just a couple of vendors. And then from there, you're going to get into a more detailed discussion with those vendors. You're going to start to share with them your entire list of requirements, that 100+ item list that talks about all the functional requirements you want to solve with the tool. And you're likely going to ask that vendor to do a proof of concept. And that's a more entailed session where they're going to customize their tools for some of your requirements, right? It's usually a little more interactive in the fact that users are asking questions and asking for, it's not a canned demo. Your participants are going to leave that and they're going to score those vendors on that big list, your comprehensive list of requirements. And in that, you're going to have the weighting that we talked about and the prioritization that we talked about, and you're going to have a scoring model. And so you're going to end up with a score for all of your vendors, right? And then you start to weed out. If you've done more than 2, right, let's just say you've done 3, maybe you automatically weed out 1, the bottom scoring vendor. And then you move into a phase of where you're going to start verifying references, right? You're going to talk to other people that use that software. Try to find references in that align with the nature of your organization. And then you're going to take all that information and you're going to present it to management. Sometimes you have a steering committee or a management sponsor, but you're going to present your findings. And hopefully coming out of that presentation, you're going to know which vendor that you're going to award your business. And then from there, you begin negotiations. So you've gotten to a point after stage 5 that you understand, where am I at as an organization? What are my pain points and my gaps? What am I trying to transform my organization into from a budget process perspective? What methodologies and best practices am I going to employ? And what am I going to implement from a tool perspective? So here you are at the end of stage 5, you know a lot, and you're going to take all that information and then launch into the implementation of both your processes and tools. So as you get to that point and that the implementation of your transformation, there are a few things that I want to point out that I found to be, help ensure success. And that's organizational commitment and prioritization. Your organization as a whole, from the top down, needs to be bought into this process, right? You need to make sure that you've determined and utilized those KPIs, right? Allow them to drive success as part of your budget process. You have that organizational commitment, and this is the business unit engagement and support. They're on the team. They're developing the process. They're helping develop the tools. They don't see this as some, I'm going to say corporate requirement, top-down requirement that they must, comply with. They need to want this and be actively engaged in this transformation. You can never underestimate the importance of effective project management and change management. You need to make sure you have employed organizationally employed resources of some kind to manage the project, to make sure that it stays on track. This is complex. You're combining process change with a tool implementation. You need to make sure you're moving down the path at the right pace and that you're hitting those key alignment points successfully. Then you have the change management piece, right? Everything about this transformation screams change. From the way you're going to do your budget to the tools that you're going to do your budget in. So as an organization, you need to be talking about that change. You need to make sure that people understand the change, that they have the training and support they need to effectively implement the change. You need to be committed to data standards. This could be something as simple as, oh, I do headcount planning, and everyone defines headcount the same way. It could be much more complicated, where you start talking about standardized hierarchies with, definition by level, but you need to have some sort of commitment to data standards. And then you need to centralize the management of the system, meaning there's one, that one common group is responsible for making sure the system is maintained. So now, you've gone through this process, you've implemented. So ultimately, what have you done? You've come out of budget transformation, and as an organization, you're more effectively able to tell your story. What is going on with my business performance? How are we tracking? What's driving it? How do we grow? Because you've empowered the organization with actionable data that they can use to grow. So we've come to the point where I'm going to talk a little bit about, cognizant of time, a specific experience that I've had with a global enterprise performance management implementation. And this implementation that I'm going to talk about is for a global consumer packaged goods company that was very much like what we talked about, right? Did business in 60 countries, had more than a dozen accounting systems, no standardization of accounts or process. Other than that, there was a corporate calendar and a lot of cost allocation sharing. But it was very, very difficult to aggregate information. So if the CFO asked a question about diversity of the workforce, it would take a month to put something like that together because the information existed, it was available, it just wasn't readily available, right? So this consumer packaged good company went on a journey to reduce their financial close and forecasting calendar. And they wanted to reduce their accounting close from 10 days to 5 days and their forecasting calendar from 14 days to 7 days. So the idea is that at the end of this transformation, that by day 5, they'd have fully closed books, and by day 7, they'd have an updated forecast that included those actuals. And the journey started with process transformation. It started with, let's go out and dissect our existing processes and identify the pain points and where we lack inconsistency and start to drive consistency within the processes. And there was a dedicated team of people who did that, right? For more than a year, so this is a big transformation. They worked through process transformation both on the close and on the planning and forecasting side. And then they looked at it and said to the organization, we can only be so effective with the tools that we have. You're pushing standardization and process improvements, which are fabulous throughout the organization, but we're stuck with our old tools. This company was a Hyperion shop, but there were 100 S-based databases that supported budget submission, right? So there was no purpose-built, budgeting tool. They used an S-based engine to store data, but there were hundreds, more than 100 of them, and not a single one looked the same. They didn't have the same dimensions. They didn't have the same members within the dimension. And so they said, in order to be effective with this process change, we need better tools, right? So they went down this process that we just laid out around how do we employ those tools. And they brought together 40 SMEs globally and said, it is your job to go out and select the first to define what are all the requirements and pick a vendor. And then you're going to champion the implementation of this solution. So we'd already had some process change. There was some process change that was on hold because it was impossible to do without new tools. And they launched this initiative. And they followed that guide, the step-by-step guide that I mentioned around defining requirements and evaluating vendors. And they came away, they ended up in this specific instance, they went with the Hyperion stack, they embraced planning, but they ripped out their tools from beginning to end, right? So they went and they built driver-based planning and forecasting. They implemented new ETL tools, so things like ODI and FTMEE if you want to talk from a tools perspective. But they went from how do we have nothing to this epiphany of tools that are going to allow us to transform our business. It was a big deal. This isn't something that happened overnight. But at the end, they were truly impacting business performance. They had the ability, by employing driver-based, bottoms-up budgeting, they were able to react. They were able to say, you know what? I'm selling this product to this customer at this cost. They get allocated this much overhead, right? But they're not profitable. What do I need to do to make that customer profitable? So they got things like, what are my profitable clients? What are my profitable products? What happens if I have to divert distribution from one port to another or one distribution center to another? What does that do to my transportation costs? Because they had gone through the difficult process of clearly identifying the drivers of their business. What were their KPIs? What ultimately influenced the success or failure of their business? And they went from being able to recite a story that they couldn't react on to not only could they tell their story, but they could accurately predict their story. And the investment had a huge impact on their performance. So I encourage you, as you know, if you're on a journey of transformation, to fully embrace it. Embrace the process change, the organizational change, and the implementation of new tools, because if you make the investment and you do it correctly, you will change your organization. You will be able to, tell a better financial story. So there, I think we have a few minutes left. I'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you all for attending today. We'll now address questions from the question box as we receive them. While I wait for your questions, I want to remind you that we're planning many upcoming webinars on topics like Smart View updates, EPM dashboarding tools, planning budgeting cloud service, data integration strategies, and more. You can keep an eye out for these emails and find it on our event calendar on the website. Speaking of events, we'll be at upcoming events like Rocky Mountain Oracle User Group, the Financial Planning and Analysis Innovation Summit in San Diego. If you're interested in attending, I have a coupon code. We'll be at the Higher Ed User Group in Seattle, Collaborate, and large K-Scope sponsor, as always. If you're interested, let me know so I can help you get the best prices. I have a question here. How much time should an organization expect to spend on the requirements gathering stage?
That's a very good question, and I have to preface it by saying it depends on the size of your organization. But these are not 1-hour meetings. These are full-day, multi-day sessions, generally with a specific area, to map out their process and to fully understand what the inputs, outputs, and calculations are in that process. So it is more intense than people like to hear. But you come away with very valuable information about your organization.
Another question here is if we want to explore cloud technologies for planning but aren't ready to abandon our on-premise technology, such as Hyperion, what do you suggest is the best approach for doing this?
That's a good question. We're going to get into the cloud. There are ways, if you're talking the Hyperion suite, that you can employ both an on-premise and a cloud implementation. Um, One of the nice things about the cloud is that you don't have the capital requirements and the infrastructure requirements that you do with an on-premise implementation. So, but for an existing user that has on-premise, that's a bigger transition to make. But one of the things we're seeing some companies do is start to employ some development effort in the cloud, to start looking at how they could leverage the features that are only available in the cloud. So with Oracle specifically, there's enhancements that they're releasing right now only in the cloud. Other organizations are looking at it to say, oh, if I'm going to bring on a new business unit, let's say you've acquired someone, do you move that new planning process into the cloud and then bring it back to on-premise for reporting? Every story is a little different, but there are ways to start to bring together a cloud offering with an on-premise. One other thing I'll mention is if you want to talk from a reporting perspective, Oracle, in this case, does offer an enterprise reporting cloud service. So it is not the standard financial reporting. It employs a narrative, and it's a nice looking tool. It can be used on cloud and on-premise. So if you start to get to a place where you have a hybrid model, you can also start to look at some of the reporting tools that will allow reporting out of both options.
Great. It looks like we're wrapped up with questions today. Thank you everyone for spending Friday with us. We'll be sending an email with a link to the video as well as an opportunity to retrieve the slides from today. There's also a handout available, the software selection guide that Shannon had referenced earlier. If you have any questions or problems regarding receiving any of these in the next week, or if you're ready to talk to us about helping your organization, you may reach me at marketing@mindstreamanalytics.com. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.